Today, we're diving deep into the most common beginner fishing mistakes that are absolutely crushing your chances of landing fish. I've spent over 15 years guiding beginners through these exact same problems. These aren't just random tips I pulled from the internet. These are the real deal successful anglers from frustrated breakers that separated beginners who quit after a few bad trips. But before I dive into the first tip, if you love fishing and want to learn more about everything fishing related, consider hitting that subscribe button. It's free, costs you nothing, and would mean a lot to me. Anyways, let's start with the absolute biggest mistake that destroys more fishing trips than anything else: using the wrong line for your fishing situation. This mistake is so common that I see it on almost every single guided trip I take beginners on. Here's what happens. New anglers walk into the tackle shop, see fishing line on the shelf, and grab whatever looks good or whatever's cheapest. They think fishing line is just a fishing line, but that couldn't be further from the truth. The wrong line choice affects everything about your fishing experience. It changes how your bait moves in the water, how fish react to your presentation, and whether you can actually land a fish once you hook it. When you're using heavy line in clear water, fish can see that thick line, and they'll avoid your bait completely. But here's the flip side. When you're using light line around heavy cover, you're setting yourself up for heartbreak, because that fish is going to snap your line and swim away with your hook. Most beginners make the mistake of thinking heavier is always better. D-test is good. They figure if 10-pound, then 20-pound test must be twice as good. That logic makes sense until you realize that fish aren't stupid. They've seen fishing line before, and they know what it is. In other words, that clear water conditions heavy line stands out like a neon sign telling fish to stay away from your bait. The second mistake that's absolutely killing your success rate is completely misunderstanding how to read water. This one frustrates me more than almost anything else because it's so preventable. Yet I watch beginners make this mistake trip after trip. They'll walk up to a body of water and immediately start casting to the most obvious spots without taking even 30 seconds to actually look at what's happening around them. Here's what really happens when fish are feeding. They're not randomly scattered throughout the water hoping you'll find them. Fish position themselves and vary based on food, specific locations, availability, water temperature, cover options, and current flow. But beginners ignore all these factors and cast their bait into the first spot that looks fishy to them. The classic example is watching someone fish a lake by casting straight out from shore into the deepest water they can reach. They'll stand there for hours without a single bite while fish are actively feeding in shallow water just 50 yards down the shoreline. Or they'll fish a river by casting into the fastest current when fish are actually holding in the slower water right along the edges. Reading water isn't some mysterious skill that takes years to develop. It's about understanding that fish need the same things you do. They want food, shelter, and comfort. Once you start thinking about where you'd want to be if you were a fish, the whole puzzle starts making sense. But most beginners never take that step back to analyze the water before they start fishing. Moving on to mistake number 3, and this one might surprise you. Beginners consistently choose the wrong hook size for their target species and bait combination. This seems like such a basic thing, but it's actually one of the most technical aspects of fishing that new anglers completely overlook. They'll grab a package of hooks without understanding how hook size affects their presentation, their hookup ratio, and their ability to land fish. Here's the reality about hook selection. Too big of a hook and your bait looks unnatural in the water. Fish will inspect your offering and reject it because something doesn't look right. But too small of a hook creates different problems. Your bait might look perfect, but when that fish finally commits and takes your bait, you won't get a solid hook set. The fish will feel the hook, panic, and spit out your bait before you even know what happened. Most beginners think bigger hooks mean bigger fish, so they'll tie on these massive hooks that completely overwhelm their bait presentation. I've watched people fishing for panfish with hooks so large they could catch bass, then wonder why they're not getting any bites. On the flip side, I've seen beginners targeting bass with tiny hooks that couldn't possibly handle a decent-sized fish. The fourth mistake is something that makes me cringe every single time I see it happening. Beginners will find a spot, cast out their line, and then proceed to constantly mess with their presentation. They can't sit still for more than 2 minutes without reeling in to check their bait, adjust their weight, or try a different spot. This constant motion is absolutely destroying their chances of catching fish. Fish are naturally cautious creatures, especially in areas where they see a lot of fishing pressure. When you're constantly casting, reeling in, and recasting, you're creating disturbance after disturbance in the water. Every splash, every movement, every vibration is sending signals to nearby fish that something isn't right in their environment. But there's another layer to this mistake that most beginners don't understand. Fish feeding patterns aren't based on your schedule or your patience level. Sometimes fish need time to find your bait, investigate it, and decide whether it's worth the risk. When you're constantly moving your presentation, you're never giving fish that opportunity to commit to your offering. The most successful anglers understand that patience isn't just a virtue in fishing, it's a fundamental requirement. They'll cast to a promising spot and give their bait enough time to work properly. They understand that fish might need 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or sometimes even longer to finally take their bait. Here's where things get really interesting, and this brings us to mistake number 5, which is probably the most expensive error beginners make. They walk into tackle shops and buy everything that looks cool, or everything the salesperson recommends, without understanding what they actually need. This shotgun approach to gear acquisition is burning through bank accounts while creating more problems than solutions. The tackle industry wants you to believe that success comes from having the latest gadgets and the most expensive equipment, but here's the truth that nobody in those shops will tell you. Most of that gear is designed for specific situations that you might encounter maybe once or twice a season. Yet beginners load up their tackle boxes with specialty lures, complicated rigs, and advanced equipment they have no idea how to use properly. I've guided people who show up with tackle boxes worth more than my truck, but they can't tie a proper knot or present a simple worm naturally. They've got 40 different types of soft plastics, but no understanding of when to use each one. They own every crankbait color ever made, but fish them all exactly the same way regardless of water conditions. The real problem isn't just wasted money, though that's certainly painful. The bigger issue is that all this gear creates decision paralysis. When you have too many options, you spend more time switching between lures than actually fishing. You start second-guessing every choice, wondering if that other lure in your box might work better. Mistake number 6 is absolutely crushing beginners, and it's all about timing. New anglers consistently fish during the worst possible times of day, then wonder why they're not catching anything. They'll show up at the lake at 2 in the afternoon on a bright sunny day and expect fish to be actively feeding. Then they get discouraged when nothing happens and assume they just aren't cut out for fishing. Fish are cold-blooded creatures, which means their activity levels are directly tied to environmental conditions. During those bright, hot midday hours, most fish species move to deeper, cooler water, where they become much less active. They're not actively hunting for food, they're not moving around much, and they're certainly not interested in chasing down your bait. But beginners don't understand these natural patterns because nobody explains them. They think fishing is like going to a restaurant where the fish are always ready to bite whenever you show up. The reality is that fish have preferred feeding times, and if you're not on the water during those windows, you're fighting an uphill battle. Early morning and late evening are when most fish species feed most actively. The lower light conditions make them feel more secure about venturing into shallow water to hunt. The cooler temperatures increase their metabolism and activity levels. Water movement from wind or current becomes more attractive because it helps disguise their presence from prey. Moving into mistake number 7, and preventable. Beginners make this one really gets under my skin because it's completely way too much noise while they're fishing. They stomp around on docks, slam tackle boxes shut, have loud conversations, and basically announce their presence to every fish in the area. Then they act surprised when nothing bites. Sound travels incredibly well through water, much better than it does through air. Every footstep on a dock, every dropped piece of equipment, every loud voice is sending vibrations directly to fish that are already naturally suspicious of anything unusual in their environment. Fish associate these sounds with danger, and their immediate response is to move away from the disturbance or become much more cautious about feeding. The most successful anglers move quietly and deliberately around the water. They close tackle box lids gently. They avoid unnecessary conversation, and they're conscious of how their movements might be affecting fish behavior. This isn't about being paranoid. It's about understanding that fish rely heavily on their hearing and lateral line system to detect threats. Mistake number 8 ties directly into everything we've been discussing, and it's the failure to match your fishing approach to actual conditions. Beginners develop one way of fishing and stick with it regardless of weather, water clarity, temperature, or fish activity levels. They become one-trick ponies who can't adapt when conditions change. Successful fishing requires constant adjustment based on what's happening around you. If the water is murky, you need to choose baits that create more vibration and noise to help fish locate them. If the water is crystal clear, you need to downsize your presentation and use more natural colors. If fish are inactive due to a cold front, you need to slow down your retrieve and work your bait more subtly. But beginners resist making these adjustments because they're comfortable with what they know. They'd rather stick with their favorite lure and hope it eventually works rather than analyzing conditions and adapting their approach. This stubborn approach to fishing is keeping them from developing the skills they need to become consistently successful. The final mistake we need to discuss is perhaps the most fundamental error of all. Beginners give up too quickly when they don't immediately catch fish. They expect instant gratification in a sport that often requires patience, persistence, and the willingness to learn from failure. After one or two unsuccessful trips, they assume they're just not good at fishing and either quit entirely or continue making the same mistakes over and over. Fishing is a skill that improves with experience, observation, and the willingness to adapt. Every unsuccessful trip provides valuable information about what doesn't work in specific conditions, but beginners see these trips as failures rather than learning opportunities, which prevents them from developing the knowledge base they need for long-term success. If this breakdown helped you identify the mistakes that have been crushing your fishing success, hit that like button and let me know in the comments which mistake you've been making most often. And if you want more videos that will transform your fishing game from beginner struggles to consistent success, make sure you're subscribed because we've got plenty more coming your way.